Patch 12.20 is upon us with some nerfs, some buffs, and some other changes too. Starting with nerfs, we have Aatrox, where his passive heal is being toned down from 100% of damage dealt to 80%. This is a decent change which will affect his sustain at all points in the game. The next nerf goes to Maokai. The heal on his passive is being slightly reduced in the early game and decently reduced in the late game to tone down his tankiness. In addition, the cooldown on his ultimate will now be slightly longer in the mid game and a good chunk longer in the late game. And the final nerf goes to Set. Firstly, his base magic resist is being lowered from 32 to 28 to make those Set mids less viable. Secondly, the health regen on his passive early game is being reduced a large amount. However, his right punch AD ratio is being slightly increased to keep these AD set builds strong. The first buff goes to Akshan, who will now be able to infinitely swing with his E like a Beyblade. The next goes to Elise, where they've smoothed out her auto attack and Q combo to make it much easier to land. Following this, we have Evelyn. The bonus magic damage on her Q against marked targets is having a flat increase at all levels. In addition, her charm's duration is being increased by 0.25 of a second at all levels. Next, we have Gwen, where we see the flat damage on her Q being increased both during the initial damage and the final snip. Following this, we have Jace. His W and melee form is having its mana restoration increased by a significant amount, giving him a good chunk more sustain. In addition, the bonus armor and magic resist he gets when transforming will now scale with AD, making his AD late game build a good amount tankier. Next, we have Kennen, who's getting a fun change where after his E ends, his bonus attack speed will now allow him to surpass the usual attack speed limit. Following this, we have Mr. OK himself with Rammus. The self-slow of 30% on his W has now been completely removed, making him a speedy walking tank. In addition, the dash speed of his ultimate will now scale even better with movement speed for easier engages. Next, we have Wukong, where his ultimate is getting a large amount more AD scaling, making landing his entire ultimate incredibly damaging. Following this, we have one of my favourites in Ziggs, where the flat damage on his Q is being increased by 10 at all levels. This change is more significant in his early game, and if he's able to land multiple Qs, it will deal a good amount more damage. After this, we have an adjustment for Blitzcrank, where both his base AD and base attack speed are being slightly reduced. His mana barrier passive is being changed from 30% of his mana to 15%, scaling up to 45% with levels. His W is being buffed to deal even more damage to monster as he levels up the ability, and his E is being nerfed, losing a small chunk of damage against enemy champions. However, there's also a funny change where his E will occasionally uppercut monsters to the moon. These changes will nerf support Blitzcrank and encourage him to be a jungler. Before we get on to items, make sure to like the video and comment below who you think benefits most from these changes. I'd love to think it's Ziggs, but I don't think that's true. Following this, we have some changes to items. Demonic Embrace is having its health reduced, but the AP increased. In addition, the ranged burn damage will now deal slightly reduced maximum health damage. What this mainly does is makes it less viable for tanks and pretty similar on mages. Next, we have Frozen Heart, which will now cost 2700 gold. The armor is being increased from 80 to 90, however the flat reduction is going from 7 to 5. This will still be a strong item, but not so easy to rush. Following this, we have Mortal Reminder, which will now cost 2600 gold. The AD is being increased to 35, and the attack speed is being reduced to 20%. Finally, we have Sterak's Gauge, which will now have better AD scaling, and the shield given will now be slightly larger and decay a good amount slower. These changes may well bring up to speed with Death Stance. For runes, we have a nerf to Lethal Tempo, where ranged champions will now get 50 bonus range rather than 75. And finally, we have new Halloween Bewitching skins.